Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you, D'Angela, for this opportunity. And shout out to Monique for her reading of Graffiti Bridge. It was brilliant. There are some things that we connect on as far as our presentations, but she took it in an even deeper direction. And I really, really appreciate that. So let's get started. Prince's Sacred Triumph over the Profane, describing Graffiti Bridge. So let's talk about the term Graffiti Bridge. It's actually named for a real-life bridge that was in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. It was taken down in 1991, but it earned its nickname in the 60s because anti-Vietnam War protesters would paint peace symbols on it and write other messages. And it's not a shock that that resonated with Prince because we see a lot of hippie ideology and free love and sexual freedom messages in his early music. And also, Prince had a great way of taking real life places and using them to symbolize something else, whether it was a philosophy or a state of mind or a view of the future. And sometimes it was a spiritual state. Before we get into that, though, some examples of that: Uptown, Calhoun Square, Paisley Park, 3121. So when it comes to Graffiti Bridge, though, Prince defines it for us. And I love when he does that, so we don't have to guess. So in the title song, Graffiti Bridge, he sings, "Everybody wants to find Graffiti Bridge, a reason to believe that there's a heaven above." So you have that spiritual fulfillment there. A little bit of background about the movie. It came out in 1990. It's the quasi-sequel to Purple Rain. There were a lot of problems getting this film made. There were script issues. There were casting issues. Jill Jones talked to us a little bit about that, but he wanted Madonna for the female lead, and then Kim Basinger, and then finally settled on Ingrid Chavez, who was a real life muse to him. He called her the spirit child, and she was instrumental in some of the decisions that he made regarding his spiritual music. In terms of the set, Prince himself called it cheap. The movie was made to resemble old Hollywood musicals. He's the director. His directing is not fantastic. The acting is not fantastic. So it's no wonder that the critics didn't really enjoy the film. So the New York Times said, "Prince's direction is on par with his acting, roughly equivalent to his aptitude for presidential politics." Now, I think this is especially nasty. I'm not a fan of what most critics were writing in the 80s and 90s because they tended to talk about him like he wasn't intelligent. So I really don't like the way this is phrased, but I understand because it's not a great movie. The Los Angeles Times said it's a mixed bag. Parts of it are awful. So at the box office, it actually debuted at number 8, which is really low. For reference, Jacob's Ladder was number 1. The movie Ghost was number 3. And then when it came out on VHS, because video rentals were really big at that time, Billboard had a chart about them. It debuted at number 32. This little excerpt from the Los Angeles Times is talking about it as a box office bomb. And just for reference, Ghost was like the most popular rental at that time. But here's what Prince said. He said, "It was one of the most spiritual, uplifting things I've ever done. Maybe it will take people 30 years to get it." And that's from a 1991 USA Today interview. And here we are 30 years later. And I think when you take Graffiti Bridge, when you look at it in the context of his full spiritual journey, it's a really important film. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So Graffiti Bridge, the movie and the album, they highlight Prince's real life struggle with the sacred and profane. They reference the critical and commercial backlash he received in response to his spiritual music, and they can convey that spiritual contentment is more rewarding than sexual ecstasy, sex-centered art, and fame. And this presentation is taken from my chapter in Theology and Prince that was released recently by Lexington Books, and shout out to the editors, Jonathan Harwell and Katrina Jenkins. So let's talk a little bit about how Prince foreshadowed this film. In a 1985 Rolling Stone interview, he talked about a period of depression that he went through and how God helped him through that. And he said, It changed me and made me think differently about how and what I wrote and how I acted toward people. I'm going to make a film about it. In Ebony in 1986, he said, God is inside of us. You've got to find out who you are and what you stand for and learn the difference between right and wrong. I'm going to do a film, hopefully one day, about someone's struggle through that. So I like to think that he was talking about Graffiti Bridge. We don't know for sure. He could have been talking about the film The Dawn, which he wanted to make. And we all know that the Dawn is a really spiritual phrase for him. But you could really make a case either way. And around this time in the mid-'80s, Prince was being really forthcoming about his religious beliefs. At this time, he was still looked at as this sex symbol, but he had been gradually introducing Christian themes into his music. And it seems like he really wanted to let people know where he stood regarding his religion. So then you get to 1987 and he puts out the Black Album, which is explicit, it's really sexual, and he decides that it's evil, it's too negative. He replaces it with the more spiritual album, Love Sexy. And I think that Love Sexy is his strongest declaration of his Christian faith up to that point. You hear that in the song Anesthesia, where he's saying, "Save me, Jesus, you are my God." And I actually talked about this at D'Angela's Love Sexy Symposium a couple years ago. The video of that presentation is in my virtual booth, A Purple Day in December, so you can check it out there. Love Sexy also kind of represents Prince's message of love over lust. So again, he was talking about sexual freedom and free love in his earlier music, but this time he's really talking about monogamy and commitment. And you can hear that in a song like When Two Are in Love, when he says nothing's forbidden and nothing's taboo when two are in love. He's also presenting this message that sexual ecstasy, spiritual fulfillment is equal to sexual ecstasy. So he can find that same satisfaction spiritually that he did sexually. And so when you listen to a song like Love Sexy, it sounds like that he's talking about sex, but if you listen to it a little bit like closer, you'll see that he's talking about being satisfied with the love of God. And that's why he defines Love Sexy as falling in love with the heavens above and not with a boy or a girl. So while we all love Love Sexy, it really wasn't well received when you compare it to his earlier work. So it sold under 1 million copies in the US, and that was pretty low. That was since his debut. He hadn't sold that little. And then it debuted at number 11. And that was the first time that he fell out of the top 10 since 1981's Controversy. When he brought the Love Sexy tour to the US, the audiences were not as big as they once were. And a lot of the critics, even though they acknowledged his faith, they still thought he had too many contradictions. They thought it was confusing. Some people thought he was being too preachy. And even though the next year with Batman, he had this big hit, that was tied to a blockbuster movie. So Prince was really well aware of his declining commercial success. And there were multiple factors for that, but as his success was declining, his music was becoming more spiritual. So he was grappling with that. And you can see that in Graffiti Bridge. He also wanted to take the message of Love Sexy over to Graffiti Bridge. And Ingrid Chavez talks about that. She said, "I don't think people were understanding what he was trying to do. I think he was really trying to express this message from Love Sexy in a different way through the film. Like, oh, you guys didn't get it. Let's try this again." So, quick overview. Morris Day and the Time, they're back. Prince as the Kid is back, but this time with the new power generation set of the revolution. They both have ownership of the club Glam Slam. Prince is doing his spiritual music, but it's not really bringing in an audience. They're losing money. Morris Day is tired of this. So they agreed to this battle, this musical battle. And if the Kid loses, he has to surrender control of the club. So let's get into some of the dialogue here. Morris says, "People tell me you've been making that spiritual noise again. You know I can't make no money that way." Prince says, "If you ever gave it a chance, one day you would." And Morris says, "This music will never change anybody." So while it's pretty funny, but you can see the struggle that the kid is going through and that Prince is going through, wanting to do this more spiritual music, but not being sure that it's going to be received by his audience. And so Ingrid Chavez plays Aura, an angel. She's guiding the kid on this path. She's encouraging him to stay the course. She's leading him to God. And so Prince says, or the kid says to her, "Nobody likes my music." And she says, "Don't deal from that place. Every time you do, you'll lose, but you lose nothing from believing." And there's a key scene in the movie where Aura is going through the kids' sheet music, and she's pulling out songs like The Spiritual World and God is Alive. And these are real life songs that Prince did not release. God is Alive is a duet with Mavis Staples. And it kind of makes me a little sad to think that Prince possibly didn't want to release this music because he didn't know how it was going to be received. Again, we don't know for sure, but it's something to think about. So the battle begins, the first round of the battle anyway, and Prince does not do a spiritual song. He performs Tick, Tick, Bang, which is explicit, really sexual. This performance is really sensual, as you see there on the left. And it's funny because he loses this round of the battle. And I like this song. Like, I think it's one of the strongest songs on the album, but because it's not in line with his spiritual beliefs, he can't win with it. And then you see him at the end of the performance walking down the street by himself, dragging his little guitar behind him in defeat. And Aura is not happy about it at all. Speaking of Aura and speaking of sex, the kid is attracted to Aura in the film, but they never have a sexual relationship. And that's something that Prince was really proud of. In the interviews about this movie, he would say, nobody gets laid in this film. There's no violence. It's PG-13. Also in the movie, Morris Day is attracted to Aura, and she's actually trying to guide him to a more spiritual path too. She's a little less successful with him, but she says to him, "Still forever searching for the spiritual substitute for sex." So that goes back to the love sexy message that we were talking about getting satisfaction from spiritual fulfillment instead of sexual ecstasy. So that was a role that Prince was really trying to, bring home. That was a message that Prince was really trying to bring home. So by the end of the movie, though, the kid wins the battle with the song "Still Would Stand All Time," very spiritual, basically a gospel song. And Aura makes a sacrifice to bring him to that point and also to bring Morris to that point. Morris is seemingly turning himself around by the end of the movie. And I love the line in the movie, too, where someone says, "Man, can you believe it? The kid won, and with a ballot." So in the song "Still Would Stand All Time," which Monique read this lyric too, but it's just around the corner. It's just around the block. This love that I've been waiting for, a love solid as rock, a love that reaffirms that we are not alone, a love so bright inside you, it glows. Well, this is the love of God. And you'll see through the movie, Aura writes that to him on a note. He's collecting this message. And by the end of the film, he has the full message of God's love. And he personifies love. Love can save us all. Love opened its arms. So that goes back to the God is love message and Love Sexy. So getting a little bit more into the music too, Elephants and Flowers. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's another personification of God. God is love. Love the one who is love. There will be peace for those who love God a lot. Also, Prince has some biblical imagery in terms of light. So in the song "Can't Stop This Feeling I Got," he says, "I'm talking about an everlasting light." Well, that is taken from the Bible, Isaiah 6:20. "For you will have the Lord for an everlasting light." Also, going back to "Still Would Stand All Time," he sings, "Run to the light, leave your past behind." Well, the light could represent Jesus Christ. In John 8:12, Jesus says, "I am the light of the world." In New Power Generation Part 2, which is a remix featuring TC Ellis, the rapper, he has a Christian sounding rap in this song. So we'll break that down a little bit. He says, I must tell the truth. I cannot lie. I was headed for the kill, steal, destroy, and die. Every time I hear kill, steal, and destroy, I always think about the Bible because those are the exact words that Jesus uses in John 10:10 to talk about false prophets. And Jesus says, I am come that they may have life. Excuse me. Also, TCL says success is something that we all want, but the truth is what we need to reach our point. So that goes back to the message of finding satisfaction in spiritual fulfillment instead of fame. TCL also says, remember the truth, you can't go wrong. The flesh is weak, but the spirit is strong. This notion of the flesh being weak is found in Matthew 26:41. And I just want to stress that even though we see Prince moving in this direction at this time, it's not an overnight change. In fact, these are struggles and ideas that he returned to time and time again throughout his life and throughout his career. So it's not as if, after this movie, he didn't feel like he didn't have anything to prove. And so you can see that in like songs like The Latest Fashion, which he has a guest rap on there. And he's saying things like, I'm still the king in all y'all's court. I'm back and I'm harder than a heart attack. Ain't nobody funky like me. So he still felt like he had to prove, how talented he was, how cutting edge that he was, even as he was searching for spiritual fulfillment. But speaking of funky or funk, I want to talk about the song We Can Funk by George Clinton. Of course, it's an old Prince song. Prince wrote it years ago, but there's an important change that I want to note in the lyrics. So when Prince was recording it in 83 and 84, the lyric was, sex between two people is all right, whether they're in love or not. So that goes back to his sexual freedom, free love message from the early days. But by the time you get to the 1990 version, it's sex between two people is all right if all the love in the world is what they got. So that goes back to connecting sex to love, commitment, monogamy, thinking about love differently, thinking about sex differently, rather. And also around this time, Prince had a B-side called Sex on the Scandalous Sex Suite in 1989. And the full title of that song in the liner notes is The 80s Are Over and the Time Has Come for Monogamy and Trust. And then in the song, he says, do the nasty with one love, but only one. So that kind of goes back to that commitment. And that's really rooted in biblical thinking about sanctioning sex within marriage. So those were some of the messages that he was pushing more and more. Throughout the soundtrack and throughout the movie, Prince and the Kid, he's presenting himself as a man searching. So you see that in songs like Thieves in the Temple, where he's singing, I feel like I'm looking for my soul, like a poor man looking for gold. And back to Graffiti Bridge, everybody wants to find Graffiti Bridge, something to believe in, a reason to believe that there's a heaven above. The Question of You is a whole song about searching, and you can interpret the you to be God. And right before the song comes on in the movie, the kid is talking to Aura and he's saying, I'm looking for a sign. I want to know that it's okay to continue. I want to know that somebody's up there listening. And then in the song, he says, all of the questions of my life will be answered when I decide which road to choose. So by the end of the film, he's choosing spiritual fulfillment over success, over fame, over sex, love over sex. So he's telling you which way he's going to go by the end of the film. But again, it's not like he was a 100% new person after this, so our next album is Diamonds of Pearls. We know that has a lot of sexual content, and journalists even asked him about that. They said, well, you had this spiritual awakening, so, what are you doing now? And Prince responded to them. In a 1991 Details interview, he said, "Love Sexy," because the message of Love Sexy was carried over into Graffiti Bridge. It's carried over throughout the rest of his career. He says, "Love Sexy is a state of mind that I've come to, and I know it is still there. If I didn't have it, I wouldn't make records anymore. When you have that, you know who you are." So I hope that you will think about some of those themes as we all revisit the film tonight. I will be live in my virtual booth at 7:30, so come chat with me. That'll be really fun. Also, please follow me at apurpledaydecember.com. I'm finishing up my book on Prince's spiritual journey, so you can keep up with that there. And when you go to the website, sign up for my newsletter. I would appreciate that because I'm trying to build an audience for my book. But again, I just want to thank D'Angelo one more time and all of you for watching. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Erica. I really do. I always appreciate your presentations. And there are a couple of quotes in there that I really want to reflect on. And the one that really stands out is the one about getting Graffiti Bridge 30 years later. I don't remember reading that quote, but it's, serendipitous that here we are 30 years later. And I think we're just now getting it because Monique broke it down for me, at least. Like I have so much more clarity now. So I do think that that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do the symposium is because a lot of people don't get it. And I think it's definitely the film in particular is worthy to be studied. So I really appreciate your scholarship around the film. Thank you so much.